And even our producer, Ian Boffey, today has chucked in one into the mix. Constant and Opal by The Church. Very good, very relevant, because it brings me neatly to my next guest. Legendary singer, legendary guitar slinger, Marty Willson-Piper is going to join me in just a moment. But first, let's hear him in action in a mellow mood on an acoustic version of a classic from The Church. This is Chromium. Chromium from The Church, one of Australia's best and best loved bands, and the man who played guitar on it worked with them for many, many years. But as a singer-songwriter and as a guitarist, Marty Willson-Piper has an incredible list of bands to his credit, including not just The Church, but All About Eve, Moat, The Saints, and even Swedish prog rockers Anekdoten. He's released a number of albums under the pseudonym Nocturnum, and with producer-collaborator Andy Dare Mason, who's worked with everyone from Paul McCartney to Tina Turner to Soul to Soul. Marty is coming to Edinburgh later this month, Thursday the 21st of March, to play the Voodoo Rooms, but luckily for us, he's in our London studio right now to tell us all about it. Marty, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Good, great to have you on. Lovely to listen to that there. How do you feel when you hear tracks like that on the radio again?
I feel like I was younger.
Nicely put. I mean, I guess most fans would perhaps know you best as a guitarist and singer from your decades in the Church, but as I mentioned, you've really had such an eclectic musical career spanning more than 35 years. You've clearly got a real work ethic, and I read you kind of put it down to coming from the north of England, growing up in Liverpool. Is that right?
Yeah, well, I've always I've never shied away from the work. It must be something to do with maybe if I'd been born in 1820, maybe I would have worked in one of those satanic mills.
You've just gone where the work was.
That's right.
Whatever the work. But you also have a habit of people just asking you to do something. You go, yeah, okay, I'll do that.
Yeah. Well, I guess I got to like it. but I've always been pretty eclectic in my tastes. Actually, I'm kind of comfortable in a lot of different areas. There's things I can't do. I mean, I can't do jazz. I can listen to jazz and I can like it, but I can't do it. I can't play it. It's not my thing, But as you've mentioned, some of the groups I've been in a sort of a psychedelic group. I've been in a punk group. I've been in a sort of a goth folk group. I've been in a progressive rock group. And here I am with my wife playing in a duo where it's 12-string acoustic and violin. So I've always been kind of comfortable in lots of different versions of myself.
Yeah, can't quite stick you in a pigeonhole, that's for sure.
No.
Well, let's take you right back to your Liverpool background. I mean, it's difficult to speak to anyone who's a musician coming from Liverpool who perhaps weren't influenced by the Beatles. What was your connection with the band?
Well, I had an elder brother, so that meant that the Beatles were in our house from way early. I remember hearing Lady Madonna on the radio in the 60s, and my brother had all the Beatles singles and EPs and everything, the Twist and Shout EP. I remember the covers and the tracks. I was always really interested in records and music. Radio Luxembourg, Radio Caroline,
Were you playing at that time?
Pardon?
Were you playing at that time?
No, I didn't start playing until I was like 14, so that would have been in the early 70s. My brother was in a cabaret band in the northwest of England, in working men's clubs, and he used to go around and play 8 days a week with a cabaret band. So I kind of had music in the house from him and his record collection, and also my parents were very into music. My dad was a big Frank fan, Frank Sinatra, Shirley Bassey, and Nana Muscuri were his three, and my mum was a swing fan, Glenn Miller fan. So we always had lots of music in the house. Yeah.
Well, as we mentioned, and this is obviously where your varied and eclectic music tastes come from. And you talked about when you did finally sort of pick up the guitar. Can you remember how that came about? Do you remember what made you do it? How it happened?
Well, it was probably something like really sort of basic, like hearing Deep Purple. I don't know.
I fancy doing that.
Hearing Richie Blackmore play a lead solo or something like that. But I mean, it wasn't. This is the thing about my eclectic. I keep on going on about my eclectic taste. I was always happy to listen to rock music and listen to reggae music, listen to the Beatles, listen to Led Zeppelin, listen to the whole Tamla Motown thing, listen to glam, all those kind of different styles. And I never really copied anybody. I never really tried to copy any, a lot of people sort of say, that was my main influence. That's who I want to be like. That was the person that drove me. It was more the whole thing drove me, All I knew was that as soon as I heard music, I turned into a sort of a jelly with no control over my emotions. I was just very moved by music.
So tell me then, how does this young kid growing up in Liverpool, surrounded by all this music, find himself in an Aussie psychedelic band in the late 1970s, half a world away? I'm sure there was a more complicated route to it, but give us a quick jump.
Yeah, well, I was in a band with, you mentioned the Noctorum project with my oldest friend Andy Dare Mason. Well, he's just called Dare now anyway. But we grew up together on the Wirral, near Liverpool, and he moved to London. Then I moved to London, and we got in a band down there, and we started messing about with the group. And I met a girl, Lucy, and after about 3 months, Lucy, as we were struggling to survive in London, as most people do, she said to me, "Let's go to Australia." And I went, "All right." And so we sort of got on a plane, went to our first plane journey I ever took was to Australia.
Wow.
And we flew out there, and she was obviously Australian. She had a friend who had a flatmate who knew the other guitarist in the ex band, the Church, and they were looking for somebody, and I was in. I had, one of the main reasons I was in though was because I looked amazing. If you just could see me at 21 with my fake tiger skin jacket and
your Brian Jones haircut
and my half permed hair and my silver earrings, I was just in,
So the look more than the ability?
Who cared about what I played like? I just looked great.
And what your memories have been with the Church? We had Steve Kilby on the show last year, and we talked about Under the Milky Way, which is a huge song for the band, and almost eclipsed the band. He said, "What's your relationship with that song now?"
Well, this is what happens: is hits become more important than the source. And it's a double-edged sword, really, because you get attention, notoriety. Oh, you're the band that did that. But then when you play something that is interesting to you, people kind of go, "Oh, yeah, so you have other songs." Well, I'm not so interested in the other songs. I just want to hear the hits, And you see a lot of bands running around the world these days from my era, my youthful era, who are kind of like tribute bands to themselves. From Echo and the Bunnymen, Psychedelic Furs, all those bands who people aren't really interested in their latest album. Yeah. They're sort of interested in the nostalgia. And that's what happened with 60s bands as well. Like, people don't want to really hear the Zombies' new album. They want to hear the Zombies' 60s hits. They don't want to, you don't want to hear Ray Davis' new album. You want to hear the Kinks' old hits. You don't want to hear Pete Townshend's new album. You want to hear the Who hits, And it's a bad situation because once the new songs were old songs.
Absolutely.
Well,
there's obviously so much to your career to try and cram in the short space of time that we have. I want to talk to you about All About Eve, but let's take a little moment and hear some of your work with All About Eve. This is Farewell, Mr. Sorrow. Well, not actually Farewell, Mr. Sorrow, but All the Rings Around Saturn from All About Eve. And this is tied into my guest today, Marty Willson-Piper, who was playing on guitar and wrote the lyrics for that one. Little technical hitch there, Marty, but you forgive us that one?
Yeah, sure. That was a B-side, though, and Farewell, Mr. Sorrow was a bit of a hit, so I don't know.
Well, it's just good to hear All About Eve back on the radio again. What's your memories of working with that band, and how did that come together?
I was on tour with the Church in Chicago. Phone rang. It was my manager, Julianne Regan from All About Eve's, trying to get hold of you. I went, "Oh, yeah?" And I said, okay, tell her to give me a call. And so she got my number, gave me a call. They'd lost their guitar player. They were looking for another guitar player to make an album with them. And I was their number one choice. And I was happy to go over and talk with them and see what kind of material they had. And what actually ended up happening was that we just got together and we kind of got along really well, and we just wrote a new album together. So it worked out great.
As an artist, you clearly must thrive from going from project to project, band to band, and
I do, yeah.
I don't think you'd be the type who would just like to sit and do the same kind of thing year in, year out.
No, well, that's why I do it. I mean, I always kind of a little bit worried about trying to score the same goal, you know? That's like, you hear a lot of groups and their thing is to sound like a different, they're always trying to achieve to sound like this one idea, trying to improve the idea perhaps, true, but they're always going for the same idea. And I kind of like the idea of, when you listen to the White Album, back to the Beatles, when you listen to the White Album, you don't sort of go, Revolution Number 9 and Julia and sort of, I mean, the eclecticism is what the range is what makes it work.
So when it comes to playing live, you're coming on tour and you're going to be in Edinburgh shortly. How do you decide what you're going to play? Do you leave things well alone? Do you revisit stuff, or is this new material, as you say?
It's really difficult because I have the Moat project, I have the Nocturne project, solo records, the bands I've been in, it's really hard to choose what to play. New material, I've always got new material on the boil. But sometimes, it depends on the format. Here we are, my wife and I, Olivia, we sort of play songs that suit the format, violin, acoustic 12-string guitar, vocals, sort of poetic songs. It's what fits into that format. I mean, we do try and, do some other things. It's not just purely folky. I have been in sort of a range of different groups, so I try and incorporate that into this format. But you are kind of restricted, obviously.
Well, I'm sure the fans won't be disappointed.
No,
Marty.
of course they won't.
Of course they'll have a great time. Thank you so much for speaking to me. We could have spoken to you easily for another 35 minutes, but our time has gone against us. Thanks very much indeed. Thanks, Marty.
All right, thanks, Grant.
Marty Willson-Piper, he's playing the Voodoo Rooms in Edinburgh on Thursday, March the 21st. Get along there and see what he has planned. More information, go to the Afternoon Show BBC Radio Scotland webpage.